Happy Wealth Wednesday, Ann Abad, as you're known. I am so excited to share your story. It's been really such an honor and so much fun to have you part of the last cohort in Eve and to really be diving into so many different topics with you that I can't wait to share here today with everyone. So I'd love to kick us off first. If you could just give me a little bit of a background of who you are and where you're calling in from today.
Happy Wealth Wednesday to you. Back at you, sister. I'm calling in from Palo Alto, California. Stanford University is our backyard, Northern Californian forever. So that's where I am in the world. And I have a few different contexts. I am a strategist, a longtime strategist here in Silicon Valley, executive coach, done a little bit of work with Stanford GSB Women in Management Program, and also work with the International Bateson Institute out of Stockholm as a warm data lab facilitator. So lots of different contexts there for you. Wore a lot of different hats over my many decades of work.
The first question we always ask is, what was your first ever investment? Do you remember what got you started or who?
When I was around 31, we bought the house that we're standing in right now. We just bought a house right across the street that we're moving to. And we had to borrow, I think, $5,000 from my father-in-law to basically pad our bank accounts so we didn't look totally broke. You know, my husband had to have a house before you could have a kid, and we did it all in the same month, 31 years ago. So I remember this $5,000 advance that my father-in-law gave me or us, and then we had to pay it back. And when we paid it back, he turned around and said, take this money and go buy Oracle stock. And so we did. And that's what kind of got us in the stock market, you know, and a portfolio. We were, you know, really young. We were early in our careers. I was 6 weeks pregnant, or, you know, 9 months later, I had a kid. So not a lot of extra money floating around, but it got us in the game, as well as, you know, this house was, you know, a first investment as well, 31 years ago. And it's just ridiculous what it's going to sell for here in a couple of weeks.
So how and why did you end up ultimately getting into your space, going from this young woman just starting to invest in Oracle to then later actually starting to advise some of, you know, the top Silicon Valley execs in space, and then ultimately now diving into this world of Web3?
So originally I'm a neuroscientist, and when you study rocks, you study patterns. And so I'm always looking for complexity in patterns and like, what is the pattern that connects? So that was really what I got through my academic training. And I started to work for Chevron early on, couldn't stand working for Chevron, quite frankly. And started work for startups when I moved to Boulder, Colorado. This is in the mid 80s. And it was early on in energy imaging. It was early on in computer-assisted cartography, which eventually became Google Maps. I worked for the predecessor of Google Maps, and always looking at understanding how to look at landscapes and how to look at pattern. So once I landed back in California in the very late 80s, you know, started working for a company called ETAC, which was the early predecessor of Google Maps. And then I just had startups in my blood. I was very much a startup, you know, kind of gal. Loved the Wild West of all that. This is the early moments of Apple Computer, and stayed in working with startups in visualization and graphics, and then landed at Silicon Graphics, which is really the cultural creator, you know, as far as, you know, the culture maker and creator of Netscape and eventually Google. The amount of creative talent and people who went on to build companies like Google, like Netscape, like NVIDIA, and to be part of that type of innovation and creativity and that legacy in Silicon Valley is how I got started.
But before we dive into the idea of like the fractals that you're seeing in the Web3 space, I'd love to learn a little bit more about what role you feel you play in the wealth space and why it's important.
It's really important for me to model financial literacy for my daughters. I personally came from a family that did not have that financial literacy. I come from a medical family, and they were all about, being of tremendous service to their patients and not paying so much attention to their financial health. And consequently, I and my siblings had to financially support our mother over 20 years of her life. And she just passed, and now I have some freed up capital to really actively invest. Not only is it my interest, Steve and I have done well in the market, in our financial decisions, in our investments, but I wanted to stretch it into really investing in startups and this experience I'm having with Portfolia. So it was twofold. It was modeling for my daughters and finding them resources to build this type of financial literacy, which they don't teach you in high school, even in a town like Palo Alto, which they don't teach you at fancy 4-year liberal arts schools. That costs us lots of money. It just became very clear as my daughters are going to be gifted a certain amount of wealth that I needed to find some resources for them.
What do you think has been something exciting that you've learned as you think of your role of like observing patterns? What did you see in like the early internet days of Palo Alto that drew you to Web3, that drew you to a community like Eve, for example?
4 years ago, I happened to have some friends involved in a metacurrency project called Holochain. And so I did a residency with them around narrative. I just written a book on narrative generation, and hung out with them, stayed at the Holodeck in San Francisco for a residency weekend, and just looked at, currency and wealth and value, some real meta questions around what is value. That's what then led me to blockchain. The Holochain is really the next generation of some of what blockchain wants to do, but it's very peer-to-peer. It's a distributed system. So it really sparked my interest and my curiosity.
Is there a person or a company in the space that's really inspiring you right now, and why?
Well, I mentioned Holochain, and they still inspire me because it's really about working for the commons, and they're looking out further. So their founder, Arthur Block, is someone that really inspires me because, and I know a lot of the community, because of their ethics and their integrity. They're not just in it for the money. They are the antichrists of Bitcoin. And I just had the honor and pleasure of really getting to know them. And it was all very serendipitous. But I look at, and in their coding and development community, they really made an effort to have women in this community. So they were inclusive, in the days before DI was, all about the diversity inclusion movement. And I look at who's developing next, whatever next is, and what kind of conscious bias is there? How do we really address that? Because for the crypto world and the metaverse world, man, it's very male. And that's probably one of the key reasons I tracked you guys down early on. Like, where are the women in this? How do we, if this is going to happen, it felt so dystopian. And how can it be more protopian? How can it be more, a more balanced next great brave world that we're creating?
I'd love to just hear what advice you would give to someone getting started, whether it's teach their daughters or their children, or even just for themselves.
Like I said, I was very motivated by the FOMO factor and really needed something new to think about. So I'm just always curious and like to stay, current. And so I dove into the Twitter, verse first and the YouTube verse. And it was just so bro-y. There were so many bros and so many, it's like, how could I trust credibility and the ethics? Because that's core to who I am, of who's giving me this information, and so I was scouring the YouTube and I was scouring, all of this other stuff. I needed a filter to what was real, and what was credible. I spent 6 weeks just, surfing most mornings. That was my work. That was my job. I just got on Twitter or YouTube and I listened to, and I started to hear the patterns. I started to build a fluency. And then I found you guys and I went, oh, I could be with a bunch of women. I think I connected with you on LinkedIn. It's like, okay, you're an ex-McKinsey, consultant. All right. You went to Queens. Okay. She's, I kind of sniffed you out. It's like, okay, she's real. For me as an elder, I will disclose I'm in my early 60s. There's a certain level of credentials that I am looking for. And it's kind of like old school versus new school. And then I attended your one-day seminar and I stayed the entire day and I got my badge. And that's what, closed the deal for me. It's like, okay, I'm signing up for the full course. It's great to have this intergenerational learning and experience and context. And I was very enlivened, inspired, and energized by all of your colleagues. Like, you have an incredible stable of women out there moving and shaking and creating this. So who are smart, intelligent, crypto savvy, learning by doing, creating community, incredible belonging. It's like, yeah, I want to be part of this girl gang. This is a girl gang, and maybe they'll let me play with them.
I'm so appreciative of you joining today, and I would love to leave everyone here listening on how can they follow your journey? Where can we follow kind of your journey into your own financial literacy building and exploration into this space?
My website is annbadillo.com, all one word. You can find me on Twitter at Ann Badillo, AnnBadillo. I'm on Instagram, same thing, but those are platforms. I'm probably more active on Instagram than I am Twitter, but I do have my own website. And I also say follow Portfolia. I'm an active investing member or limited partner, an LP with Portfolia. They are a boutique women's venture capital firm that was founded by women and for women. We started the first ever femtech fund. It's all around women's health from puberty to menopause. And they have about 8 other funds around active aging or food and tech, food and ag, or sustainability, or Rising America. But one thing I do want to leave at this point in my life, I'm very concerned about the planet and about future generations. And I want to make direct investments and things that get behind women founders, get behind diverse founders, get behind things that are going to make sure that there is a world for the future grandchildren that I may have, for your generation. And we know how women are aligned with ESG. Now, I think I'm very positive this week based on what President Biden has just produced as far as the biggest climate investment. So I see that there's hope on the horizon. I just have such a sense of urgency because the clock has been ticking for most of my life. I knew about this crisis, when I was at school at Davis in the early 80s. So there you have it.
Thank you so much, Ann. I so appreciate your perspective and your curiosity and your just ability to dive in and share and really work to create that future. So thank you for joining today on this conversation and for being part of the community.
Thank you. Happy to be here, and let's keep on rocking in the free world.